Right now, we'd like to look beyond today's race to a poignant anniversary coming up tomorrow. Monday marks the 40th year since the racing world was shaken to its roots by an accident in a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim, Germany, that took the life of the sport's unquestioned star, Jim Clark. Sit back now for a moment and listen to the voice of the man himself, as well as those of some who knew him and one of the many who were inspired by the legend of the original Flying Scot.
I think it was really more than the curiosity to see what it was like on a racetrack rather than, the urge to go out and beat everyone.
I know exactly where I was. I know what I was doing. It was one of the most confusing days of my life because Jim Clark wasn't going to die in a racing car. Not Jim Clark, maybe other people, but not Jim Clark. I was in Spain. I was doing a safety inspection, ironically, at Jarama. And a man came round the racetrack and told me that Jim Clark had had a big accident and it didn't look good. He went away and he came back and told me Jimmy had died.
Well, I can remember it was the first day I did an Autosport club race report from Snetterton. And I remember getting back to London and picking up an early copy of the Daily Telegraph and thinking, this is just my luck. I've put my foot in the door to start a career in motorsport, and now Grand Prix racing, all racing will be banned, because if Jimmy Clark can be killed, then it's quite clearly not safe.
I was at Brands Hatch, the BOAC 500 sports car race. I think I was about 15. It's just one of those days I shall never ever forget. The place was stunned. Yeah, I mean, I can feel it now, almost complete and utter silence. People just staring blankly at each other. The whole place went numb, really. And I still, even talking about it now, tend to feel a little bit numb.
I just grew up in a generation which thought Jimmy was magical, and perversely we always wanted him to be beaten, but we really didn't want him to be beaten. It was very odd.
I actually used to support Graham Hill against Jim Clark. It was really because Jim Clark was by far the better and dominant, and I was naturally supported the underdog because I didn't want to see somebody disappear off into the distance.
I went to the village that he grew up in, and when you go there and his headstone there, it says something like this is farmer and Formula 1 world champion. So he was still very close to his roots, and as I say, one of the greatest drivers in the world ever.
I started as an amateur hobby with no idea or no intention of becoming world champion. I don't really want to prove anything.
I saw Jimmy drive on 5 separate occasions. He was sublime every time. It was mostly in Australia. And then in March '68, a month before he died, I spent about 30 minutes chatting to him at Sydney Airport. I was a young kid. He was polite, kind, thoughtful, supportive. And then he died. I heard about the news early on a grey Monday morning in Sydney on the radio. I don't think I went to school for about a week. It took me a long time to get out of bed. But you know what? I sort of continued because the energy of that conversation I had with Jimmy stayed in the background of my life and is still there today. And for me, his spirit lives on. Great to see a new memorial being erected now at Hockenheim on the site of the accident, designed by his long-term friend and semi-manager Ian Scott Watson.
Well, I guess my memory of Jimmy, of course, is being told. I was at that BOAC 1000 kilometres that Ian Phillips was talking about, and I was wandering around between driving stints just watching my co-driver Paul Hawkins through Clearways, and somebody came up to me and said, you know that Jimmy Clark's been killed at Hockenheim? And I said, you can't be true, it can't possibly be true. And he said, yeah, it is true. And I mean, I felt just like everybody else we've seen, like Jackie Stewart said, Jimmy Clark's not the sort of guy that's going to get killed, and it was just shattering.
Well, for me, I was never privileged enough to know Jimmy, because I was but 6 in '68, and it would be another 20 years before I broke into Formula 1. But what became very evident talking to people who knew him, like David and Peter and Alan, what he was a massive figure in the sport, and he formed that true symbiotic relationship between mechanics and engineers and driver, which produced the Lotus 25 for him. And it always reminds me really of very poignant words that Jackie Stewart said, not Jim Clark, not Jim Clark. And to me, that's exactly what we all thought about Senna in my career in the sport. And he was, without any question, a massive, massive figure.
Well, younger fans may not realize the impact a guy like Jim Clark has, so let's engage in a little hypothetical exercise here. Clark's accident-shortened career was very brief by contemporary standards. There you see Jim Clark's numbers on the left, compared with those of the current standard Michael Schumacher, who is the leader in so many categories: wins, poles, fastest laps, championships. But he did have those 249 career starts, so if you extrapolate Jim Clark's career to 249 starts, at the rate he collected poles, he would have nearly doubled the career mark of Michael Schumacher. Although Schumacher would still have the edge in wins, fast laps would have gone clearly to Clark, as well as Grand Slams, which is the combination of pole, leading every lap, winning the race, and setting fast lap of the race. And perhaps it's appropriate that the two men would both theoretically have had 7 championships. Of course, Jim Clark also drove a Lotus that was much less reliable than Michael Schumacher's Ferrari. It is, as I said, a poignant anniversary Monday.